My wife cheated on me with a coworker in a motel during work hours. So I planned my revenge, and she ended up unemployed, homeless, and alone. My name is Martine. I am 35 years old, and I am a public servant in Ciudad del Sol, in the interior of Jalisco. I never imagined that the most devastating fury I have ever felt would come from the woman I once swore to love until the end of my days. What I have lived through in recent weeks has destroyed me from the inside out, and it is with trembling hands that I tell this story. Ximena, my wife for 33 years, changed so suddenly that not even the years of living together were enough to prepare me. Little by little, I began to notice signs that I could no longer ignore. The affection disappeared, intimacy evaporated, and instead of companionship, there was silence and averted glances. I have always been the type who prefers to solve my own problems without involving strangers. I am not someone who hires detectives or asks friends for advice, but there was something in me that I could no longer ignore, that instinct, that deeply rooted certainty that something was wrong. Her change began a little over a month ago. After 2 weeks, she was practically a stranger in the house. That vibrant and sweet woman had transformed into someone dry, impatient, absent. Still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was work, fatigue, or even a passing moment, but my heart said something else. In the 3rd week, I gathered the courage to follow Ximena during one of her lunch hour outings. She said she was going to meet with a colleague to talk about a project in the Department of Education, where she works. I took my car and followed her, maintaining a safe distance. She parked next to a small roadside hotel, one of those discreet ones used by those who do not want to be seen. When I saw her quickly enter room 12, I knew at that very moment that my suspicions were correct. There was no longer any room for doubt. It was not a casual meeting. She was cheating on me. The man she met was an employee from another department. His name is Omar. I had already heard of him. A guy who worked with his superiors, flattered everyone, and who was promoted quite easily. I did not know they had contact, but now her contempt at home, the vague excuses, the cell phone always face down, made sense. I spent the next few days confirming the routine. 2 more visits to the same hotel, always at the same time. At that point, my pain had already turned into anger, a cold, strategic anger, ready to act. I am not a violent man, nor am I impulsive, but I understood that I needed to end this farce with dignity and justice. So, I prepared everything. I hired a locksmith to change the locks on the house. I separated our assets equally. I canceled credit cards, and I opened a separate account to deposit the amount owed. Everything was done legally, with the guidance of my lawyer. And that day, when I left the house, I took a digital camera and a copy of the divorce papers. The confrontation would take place in that same motel, and I would be willing to see the end with my own eyes. It was not easy to see the person with whom you built a life in the arms of another. It is a blow that goes beyond pride. It is an attack on your history, on your identity. But I needed proof for myself, and so she could not deny it. I arranged with the motel manager, a discreet man, who for 1,800 pesos and my promise not to cause damage, gave me the key. According to him, he had already gone through something similar with his ex-wife, and for that reason he did not judge me. I took the key, took a deep breath, and entered the room. The door opened with a slight click. My heart was beating like a drum in a war. The room smelled of dishonor and cheap perfume. The yellowish light from the lamp reflected on the wrinkled sheets, and there they were, Ximena and Omar, half-dressed, rushed, and caught by surprise. She screamed something I could not understand, trying to push him away from her, while he stood up with childish fury in his eyes. I recorded everything with the camera. The images would not lie. While she cried and tried to cover herself, Omar tried to handle the situation as if he had some control. There was no longer room for excuses or justifications. The truth was naked before me. I left the camera on the dresser and stood firm, with a posture she had never seen in me. I was no longer the same man who made her coffee on Sunday mornings. Something in me had died, and what was left was only a wounded but determined man. When Omar approached to try to intimidate me, I turned my body to the side, as I had learned in self-defense classes, and with a single movement, I threw a punch with all the accumulated force of weeks of betrayal. He fell like a sack of cement. A heavy silence took over the room. I knelt long enough to feel his pulse. He was alive. I looked at Ximena again. She was trembling, with wide eyes. as if she did not recognize the man in front of her. And I did not even recognize him. I did not recognize myself either. The woman next to me now was not my wife. She was a stranger, huddled, soaked in tears, holding a sheet against her chest, as if that could cover the shame. I handed her the papers. That was the end. Nothing she said would change my decision. The house keys no longer worked for her. The days of living together were over. As I left the motel, I could hear her voice behind me. She pleaded, said my name between sobs, but I did not look back. If I faced her, maybe my pain would make me hesitate, and I could not allow that. I had already spent too much time ignoring the signs, trying to save something that she herself had destroyed. I returned home and found the locksmith finishing the door replacement. I tipped him and thanked him. Silently, I entered, sat at the kitchen table, and stayed there for hours. The silence in the house seemed to scream everything I could not express with words. I remembered the trips, the laughs, the ordinary days that seemed eternal. How could she throw it all away for half an hour in a roadside motel? What did Omar have that I did not? That is what tormented me. Not just the betrayal, but what it symbolized. Simina discarded me like someone who replaces old furniture. I left the camera on the table. I did not need to review the images. They were already recorded in my mind like invisible scars. I called my lawyer. The process was already underway. The case against the company where they both worked, too. Simina worked in the General Archive of the Secretariat, without direct contact with the public, without excuses. Omar was in the financial sector, and we knew something else was happening there, and it was not just a betrayal. In the following days, I collected statements from employees, entry and exit records, and even a cleaning lady from the motel was willing to testify. My pain turned into a strategy, and as the love I felt for Simina withered, the sense of justice grew within me. It was no longer just about me. It was for everyone who had ever been deceived by those who swore loyalty. Now it was war. In the following days, Simina tried everything to talk to me. She called me, sent messages, showed up at the work door, and even tried to meet me at my sister's house in Tepatit Lawn, where I had spent a weekend to clear my head. But I was adamant. I had to block all means of contact. With each attempt to get closer, I felt more disgusted with the situation. It was not regret that I saw in her. It was desperation for having lost the comfort of the life she had with me. The woman who was crying now was the same one who weeks before despised me, cold and distant, in her own home. I focused on organizing the procedures with my lawyer, Esteban, an experienced, direct, and sensible guy. He said he had seen many cases like this, but rarely with so many elements in our favor. The motel manager agreed to testify, as did the maid. 3 of Omar's co-workers confirmed the meetings and said that his behavior during work hours had raised suspicions for months. Esteban filed a lawsuit against the finance department, alleging negligence and collusion with moral harassment and inappropriate conduct in the workplace. It was not just revenge, it was justice. That same week, I received an unexpected connection. Simina's mother, Mrs. Elena. She was always kind to me, a warm, religious woman, the kind who makes coffee with cinnamon when your soul is heavy. Her voice was choked. She said that Simina had shown up crying, confessing everything, and that she and her husband were in shock. I could not contain my emotion. I cried on the phone. For years, these people welcomed me as a son, and now they were living the reflection of a choice that was not mine. I explained what was happening with the greatest respect I could, but I found it difficult to find words. Elena asked me, between sobs, to consider forgiving Simina. She said that everyone makes mistakes, that maybe it was a moment of weakness. I listened in silence, but inside me there was no longer room for that possibility. It was not an isolated mistake. It was weeks of lies, encounters, humiliations, and contempt. There was no way to rebuild a bridge that she herself burned. Respect, trust, love, everything was already under ashes. The only thing left was the pain and the duty to continue living, even without knowing where to start again. A few days later, I received an unexpected visit. Simina's father, Mr. Santiago, was a reserved and strict man, but he always respected me very much. He entered my room and asked to talk. With teary eyes, he told me that he needed to tell me something that Simina had revealed to her mother. According to him, the meetings with Omar began as a kind of blackmail. A mistake by Simina at work had been covered up by Omar, who, according to her, took advantage of that to pressure her to go out with him. At first, she would have given in for fear of losing a promotion. Then, things evolved. But this report did not seem like an apology, but rather an attempt to alleviate what was irreparable. I asked calmly if Simina told this to the police. Santiago said no, that she said she did not want to involve anyone, that she felt ashamed. But ashamed of what? Of being exposed, of being held responsible? The truth is that nothing justified what she did. Even if she had been pressured at first, she could have sought me out, reported it, and trusted me. But no, she chose to remain silent, to hide, to betray. That was not love, it was selfishness. At that moment, everything seemed part of a nightmare from which I still could not wake up. I started having trouble sleeping at night. My mind went around in circles, reliving every detail. The motel room, Simina's gaze, Omar's coldness. My body was at home, but my soul was still wandering among memories. I lost weight. I started working late, getting involved in projects and tasks that I would have previously avoided just to occupy my time and silence my thoughts. The emptiness was constant. Even with all the documentation in order, the emotional process was much more complex. The camera with the photographs was stored in the bottom drawer of the desk. I did not have the courage to look. Just thinking about those images turned my stomach. But knowing they were there gave me a certain sense of control. It was a physical proof of what I lived, of the pain they imposed on me. Sometimes, I imagined the day Simina would see those photos in court, with all eyes on her. Maybe it would not be enough to make her feel what I felt, but it would be a portrait of the destruction that she herself caused. Deep down, a part of me still hoped for some sincere sign of repentance. Days later, the official notification of Simina's dismissal from the Department of Education arrived. She was fired for allegations of inappropriate conduct and breach of protocol. The same fate befell Omar, who, in addition to being fired, was now being investigated for manipulation of financial reports, something that arose from the internal investigations sparked by my case. Discovering this gave me a silent satisfaction. It was not pleasure in the misfortune of others, but the relief of seeing the truth come to light. They thought they could play with other people's lives without consequences. Meanwhile, Simina's messages ceased. Her parents' house became her refuge. Elena informed me that she barely left her room, crying almost every day. She said that she was not eating properly and avoided talking about the future. But instead of moving me, it only reinforced the fact that she only came to her senses after losing everything. It was a late repentance, a result of the fall, not of conscience. Those who cheat do not think about the other person's pain, they only think about themselves. She erased me from her heart long before I discovered her. Only now did she feel the weight of her decisions, but there was no longer space for it in my life. The hardest part was dealing with the silence at home, that absence that filled every corner, as if the betrayal had left footprints even on the living room floor. Even her scent seemed to have dissipated. It was as if she had never lived there, but the details insisted on reminding me. A pair of slippers I did not throw away, a book she never finished reading, a necklace that was forgotten on the nightstand. Small presences that screamed. I started to take everything out little by little, putting it in a box in the closet, not out of hatred, but to protect myself, to be able to move on. Some friends said I should go out, meet other people, turn the page, but it was not that simple. After all I have lived through, trust has become a barrier. How can you believe in someone again? How can you look another woman in the eyes without thinking that one day she might do the same? It was not fair to think like that, I knew, but I could not help it. It was still early. My heart was shattered, and the reconstruction would take time, maybe much more than I would like. For now, all I could do was resist, one day at a time. A few weeks later, while trying to get back to normal, I received a new call from Santiago, Simina's father. He asked me to meet him at a discreet cafe in the center of San Juan de los Lagos. There was something else he wanted to tell me, something Simina had revealed during a painful conversation with her mother. I arrived at the place with a heavy heart, not knowing what else could come to light. Santiago's face was gaunt, aged by the burden of watching his daughter destroy her own life. He took a sip of coffee, took a deep breath, and then began to speak. He said that Simina confessed that, from the beginning of her marriage, she had felt trapped between the roles the world expected her to play: wife, exemplary employee, model daughter. He said that as much as she loved me, and she swore she loved me, there was a part of her that missed unlived experiences. This is what made her vulnerable to Omar's proposal, and that despite the supposed start under pressure, she gave in because she wanted to feel something new, something that was not predictable, routine, safe. That hurt me more than any punch. It was as if Simina had traded years of love for a fantasy of freedom, a selfish freedom that cost us our marriage and more. It was never my responsibility to provide her with everything she missed. I never asked her to give up anything. What hurt me was realizing that while I was building plans, she was nurturing silent desires, as if my presence had become a weight. The cruelest thing was not the physical betrayal, but the breaking of everything we believed in together, the dreams, the projects, the complicity. She killed it with every choice. That same week, I was informed that the company had accepted an out-of-court settlement to end the labor lawsuit that Esteban had filed because of me. The compensation was generous, more than I expected. I accepted, not out of greed, but as a symbol that even in the midst of pain, I managed to defend myself. I did not remain silent. I did not accept being mocked. With this money, I began to plan my move. I wanted to leave that city, to breathe different air. Ciudad del Sol had become a cemetery of memories that I no longer wanted to revisit. I spent the following days packing my belongings. Each object had a weight, a memory, a story. The process was slow, almost ritualistic. At night, I went to sleep exhausted, as if carrying those boxes was also carrying the rubble of my old self. Simina remained at her parents' house. Elena sent me a message saying that she was in therapy, trying to rebuild herself. I wanted her to find some kind of peace, not out of pity, but because I know that no one recovers from guilt. And although I did not want to see her happy, I also did not want to see her sunk forever. On the last day in the city, I sat on the bench in the square where we used to walk on Sundays, the same place where I proposed to Simina years ago. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, letting the afternoon wind touch my face. It was the end of a cycle of pain, discoveries, and forced rebirths. I knew that from then on, a new story would begin, a story without Simina, without Omar, without the life I thought I would have. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt that the worst was over. I moved to Guadalajara at the beginning of spring. The big city was everything that Ciudad del Sol was not. Busy, impersonal, full of possibilities and people who did not know my story. I rented a simple apartment near my new job at an urban design agency. No luxuries, just enough to start over. The first days were strange. The silence did not hurt as much anymore, but it still bothered me. Over time, the routine embraced me like an old friend, getting up early, working late, eating at home, reading at night. Everything was predictable and comforting. One day, while waiting for my car in the neighborhood garage, I met Camila, a 32-year-old literature teacher with a discreet smile and a serene gaze. We exchanged a few words about books, politics, and how the coffee in that place was too strong. There was no flirting, just a light conversation between two strangers, but it was the first time in months that I felt remotely comfortable with someone. We started meeting informally, without rush, without demands. She had been betrayed by her ex-husband and carried her own scars. It created a silent bridge between us. Our bond grew naturally, almost timidly. It was nice to talk to someone who understood without judging. Camila did not ask me uncomfortable questions or try to fix what was broken. She simply listened. Sometimes, laughing with her seemed like a sin, as if I were betraying my pain. But little by little, I let that laughter heal me. For the first time, I spoke about myself again without anger, without resentment, and it was in this cozy space that I realized how much I had matured. I was no longer the man Simina had abandoned. I was someone new. Meanwhile, the divorce process was coming to an end. Simina did not argue about anything. Her posture during the hearings was one of resignation. She simply said she wanted to finish things as quickly as possible. She did not try to reverse anything or recover assets. She signed the papers and left the room without looking back. Esteban congratulated me on the way I handled everything. He said that if all the betrayed had that strategic coldness, the courts would be full of silent victories like mine. I just said thank you. The truth is that, although we won, there was no celebration. It was just the official end of an old wound. I learned through common friends that Omar was facing serious problems. He is facing a case for embezzlement of public funds and was preventively detained. His wife divorced him, took the two children, and returned to the south of the country. The life he tried to lead in secret turned to dust. Simina, after months of seclusion, began to work as a freelancer, living with her parents. They said she hardly talks to anyone, that she has lost friends, and that many colleagues from her old department avoid her. Her name carries a shadow that will take years to disappear. My only concern now was to rebuild peace. I did not want revenge, fame, or to prove anything to anyone. I wanted, above all, to trust again, not only in people, but in myself. The worst part of betrayal is not the pain the other person causes us, but the distrust it sows in our ability to judge. I started going to therapy, something I had always avoided. Little by little, I understood that being cheated on did not make me weak, but it made me human, and that surviving the fall was, in itself, a victory worthy of respect. Months had passed since I moved, and although the ghosts still visited my thoughts from time to time, they no longer dominated me. I started to reconnect with old hobbies, photography, walking into Palpa, and I even signed up for a cooking class on Saturdays. Simple things, but they reminded me that there was still life after the end. Camila and I continued to see each other, with respect for each other's time and traumas. There were no promises or future plans made hastily, just two adults trying not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Simina never tried to contact me again. Elena sent me a message in December saying that her daughter had started attending church again, that she was asking for prayers for inner peace. I thanked her for the information, but I asked her not to inform me anymore. The truth is that, as much as I tried to forgive, I still could not forget. Forgiveness is a process that takes time, and maybe, even with time, it only comes to ourselves and not to others. That was what I was looking for, not to forgive Simina for her sake, but for mine. To be able to breathe in peace without carrying anger as baggage. One afternoon, I found one of her last letters, handwritten and forgotten at the bottom of a box of documents. It was old, from the good times. She was talking about plans to have children, about our future trip to San Cristobal, about how safe she felt around me. I read the letter with different eyes, like someone reading a made-up story. That woman no longer existed, neither in me nor in her. It was there that I felt a total pain, the grief not for the betrayal, but for the love that once was. I realized that I no longer loved Simina. I loved the memory of what I thought we had. As painful as the betrayal was, it served as a brutal mirror. I needed to be shattered to recognize myself again. I saw how much I had paid in the last years of marriage, trying to keep a flame alive that she had already secretly suffocated. I was faithful to a love that had already died. And although this brought me to the brink of collapse, today I understand that it was necessary. Because unlike her, I loved for real, and that is something that no one can take from me. My mistake was not trusting, it was thinking that love alone was enough. The case against the old department was closed with a confidential agreement. The amount received allowed me to set up a small side business, a design and photography studio that I manage in my free time. Working for pleasure, without pressure, brought me a freedom I had not experienced in a long time. The pain made way for a new version of me, a more selective, more conscious, lighter version. Sometimes I still wake up with bad memories, but they are more and more spaced out, like a scar that no longer hurts to the touch. It just exists as a memory. Camila and I continue together, quietly. We talk about the past without bitterness and about the future without rush. Neither of us expects redemption from the other, only partnership. I no longer try to patch up the holes that life opened with promises or illusions. Today, my peace is worth more than any idealized romance. Maybe I will love again, maybe not. But now, at least I know that I survived the worst, and that I deserve a life in which I do not have to prove my worth every day. One night, while reviewing old files in my studio, I came across the photographs I took at the motel. It was not intentional. They were in a forgotten folder inside a memory card I was using at the time. When I opened them, I felt my stomach turn, not from anger, but from disbelief. It was like witnessing a tragedy from another life. There they were, Simina and Omar, frozen in time, as if that moment had been a visual sentence of the end of everything. I thought about deleting the images, but I hesitated. They no longer had the weight they once had, but they represented the end of an illusion. I ended up transferring everything to a USB drive that I sealed in an envelope and left stored at the bottom of a locked drawer. Not out of attachment, but as a precaution. It was the only concrete proof of that dark chapter, in case it was ever necessary to revisit it legally. But emotionally, I had already said goodbye. In fact, the existence of those images no longer defined me. What defined me now were the small achievements of the present: a satisfied client, a well-made dinner, a quiet evening with Camila. In a conversation with my therapist, I confessed that what still hurt me the most today was not the betrayal itself, but the feeling of having been used, of having served as an emotional springboard while she sought adventures she never shared with me. He told me something that stuck with me. "You were not used, Martine. You gave yourself, and that is something noble." It was her bad choice. These words brought me a peace that neither the legal process nor the symbolic revenge had been able to offer me. That was it. I gave myself, yes, and so I left, whole, even if in pieces. The most surprising thing was reconnecting with old friends who, at the time of the crisis, had moved away, some out of discomfort, others for not knowing how to deal with the situation. They began to approach after seeing my new life take shape. Many confessed that they knew about the case, but did not want to get involved. I do not blame them. Betrayal does not only affect the couple, it embarrasses those around them. Few know how to react. What comforted me was realizing that, even without so many, the few who remained were enough to move forward. Camila knew part of this story, but she did not see the images. She never felt the need. She said she knew my pain through my eyes, not through the evidence. This moved me deeply. Being with someone who does not need to review your ghosts to believe in your truth is a privilege. Sometimes, she spends the weekend with me in the studio, sitting, reading while I edit photos. We live like this, with lightness, with respectful silence, with freedom. She does not try to heal me. She simply walks by my side, as if she knows that healing will come when the time is right. And although love still scares me, I have been letting it get closer, slowly, without promising that I will not feel fear, without guaranteeing that I will never look back, but with the certainty that if it happens again, I will know how to get up. Life has taught me that there is no guarantee of fidelity, of stability, of justice, but there are choices, and today I choose my peace over any romantic illusion. This is not coldness, it is maturity. Those who truly love do not need to beg for reciprocity, and those who do not love, in the end, get lost, just as Simina got lost. A year has passed since that day at the motel, and now, looking back, I realize how much I have changed, not only in attitudes, but in essence. I stopped being the man who believed that love was enough to keep someone by my side. Today, I understand that trust, respect, and truth are the foundations, and that when one of them breaks, love alone can no longer hold anything. Simina was the greatest pain of my life, but she was also the greatest turning point. She showed me, in the worst possible way, that it was time to see myself with more compassion and less guilt. I learned from acquaintances that she still lives with her parents in San Juan de los Lagos. She could no longer find a stable job and lives off small jobs as a remote assistant. She still carries the weight of the scandal that erupted in the department. Small towns do not forget easily, and social judgment is cruel. I do not hate her. I do not wish her harm. I just want distance. I learned that there are pains that only heal when we cut the last thread of emotional connection, and mine with her no longer exists. If one day we cross the street, I do not know if I will react, but I know that I will feel nothing more than indifference. Camila, on the other hand, has become a constant part of my life. We never made anything official, we do not need to. Our relationship is made of moments, not labels. We laugh together, we work side by side, we share silence. She does not force me to be the man I was, nor does she try to mold me into who I have become. With her, I do not need to hide my scars. On the contrary, she recognizes them and, in a gentle way, respects them. This type of love, born from mutual understanding, may not be as explosive as before, but it is much more true. I returned to visit my parents frequently. They were very shocked when everything happened. My mother, especially, felt guilty for never having liked Simina. Today, we laugh about it. They met Camila and, despite her discretion, they welcomed her with affection. My father told me during one of those Sunday lunches that he now sees me as stronger than ever. Maybe that is correct. The pain crushed me. It made me more cautious, more demanding with what I accept, more protective of myself, and above all, It taught me that peace is much better than unrequited passion. Sometimes I still wonder if Simina thinks of me, if she looks back with genuine regret, not just for what she lost, but for what she destroyed. But the answer to that no longer matters. I moved on, and moving on is not forgetting. It is remembering without bleeding. I keep the story as one keeps a book already read, with respect, but without the desire to reread it. Time is pressing, and today I can firmly say that I am a free man. Free of weight, free of fear, free of the past. This is my story, a story of betrayal, yes, but also of reconstruction, of fall and rebirth, of pain and choice. Because when everything seemed lost, I chose to save myself, and that, perhaps, was the most important decision of my life.